Well, good afternoon. As we start to get people coming online, looking forward to today's Calm COVID Convo. Today's our 11th in this series, and obviously we started the Calm COVID Convos to just take all the stress, all the hype, all the drama out of what's been going on in business with COVID and everything that's the flow-on effect of COVID. So that's why we started these things. Obviously, we've had some amazing information to share, some amazing information to support you in your business. But I reckon it's time to start to shift the conversation. It's time, as we start to hear more positive news about flattening of the curve and so forth, we start talking about how we're going to get out of lockdown and get back into work. We wanted to shift the conversation to one more about positivity, more about opportunities, more about the other side of the curve. So we're going to start to inject our Calm COVID Convos with some interviews with leaders that we look up to in the business world and that we think has something amazing to share with you as business managers, as business leaders yourself, and as business owners. And so, of course, our first special guest today is Trent Innes, Managing Director of Xero Australia and Asia. Welcome, Trent, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to catch up with you.
Yeah, and of course, we've got Rebecca Mahalik with us again. Rebecca is the Director at Business Depot Sydney, of course, leads our tech advisory offering nationally as well. Excited to have you back on the convos with us, Rebecca.
Thanks, John. I'm excited to be here again. It's amazing how many we've done in such a short period of time. It's really exciting, and I'm happy to be moving the conversation in probably a little bit more positive and nicer than just talking about tax and stimuluses all the time.
Not there's anything wrong with tax.
No, tax.
You love talking about tax, Beck.
Absolutely. I'm a total tax nerd.
Tax is pretty important. Compliance is pretty important. We've got to tick those boxes. And, companies like Xero is making it easier for us to have better conversation, deeper conversations.
Right.
And we are all accountants deep down as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
So much more to business than just preparing a tax return.
There is.
Yeah, so some of our viewers may not know, but Trent is actually an accountant himself, although it's been a while since you've practiced, Trent, or did you ever practice?
I call myself a non-practicing CPA.
So you keep paying your fee every year?
Oh, no, I should be honest, I actually did stop paying my fee some time back because it wasn't really relevant to my career anymore. But no, I did start my career as an accountant, so I do have a natural love for numbers. Yeah,
so let's get into it. And Trent, when we're doing our preparation for today's convo and how we've promoted it is, I look at you and I look at what you've done in your role at Xero and what Xero's done as a company as a whole. And I think you have an amazing modern leadership style. And I think even though you run what is now a big company, an ASX listed company, I think the way you do things, there's lessons to be learned in that for all small to medium business owners. So I'm looking forward to getting you to share that with us today. Now, in our prep, you did share with me some data that you came across. I believe you have a bit of a late night habit of searching Google Trends. Tell us about a couple of these interesting trends that you identified the other day.
So it sounds like you're giving way too much away about me that you seem to know. So yeah, it is true. While other people are watching Ozark and Tiger King, I've tried to watch Tiger King. I can't quite work out what's going on there, but I'll persevere at some stage. It's true. I do actually love sitting on the couch at night and looking through Google Trends. And if anybody hasn't used it before, basically just type in Google Trends and you can effectively go back through all of their search history and look for search terms. And you can break it down by country, by time band, and it gives some amazing insights because the reality is when people are thinking about doing something these days, they're really likely to go to Google and search. And so some amazing insights there. So some of the things I've been tracking at the moment to see what's going on is the first one was starting a new business. And so see what's happening there. And that's actually, the spike on that's been enormous in Australia. And the other one I shared with you as well is sole trader. And sole traders spiked massively as well at the moment as people are thinking, I think, about what does that next step look like for them. And that may be through opportunity or it may well be through necessity, unfortunately. But, I looked at some trends as well back over the last 30 years. So I've gone back in time as well. We produced a report earlier this year, unbeknown to us that COVID was coming, but it was called Boss Insights, and you can find it on the Xero website if you're interested in having a look at a search Boss Insights. And basically, we did it with Bernard Salt, one of probably Australia's leading demographer. Awesome guy. We looked back over the last 30 years of history of business creation in this country. And one of the things I found really fascinating was in the raw numbers of creation, every time we had some form of economic downturn, it actually spawned innovation and business creation. And so that gives me some real sort of hope, I think, and positivity about where we're heading. And if you look at the last recession, which was basically the early 90s, giving away my age here, that was basically when I was just about to enter the workforce. And so that was Paul Keating's recession we had to have.
Yeah.
We had the dot-com crash in 2000. And then in 2008, we had the GFC. What was fascinating after each one of those events is we actually saw small business start to spike up and business creation and innovation came out of that. So basically what I'm trying to say, there is hope. And, I would expect, based on what we're seeing in the early searches, that trend will play itself out again.
It's really interesting, isn't it? That when people have challenging times, that they maybe start a business. Are you seeing that at all, Rebecca, in the clients that you're sort of talking to, or have you seen it through other crises that you've worked through?
Actually, I've set up 3 new entities in the last week and a bit, and I've actually got 4 meetings to set up new entities next week. And I just, I'm so amazed. That's not what I was expecting to occur out of this event, but people are trying to take control of their own destiny a little bit more, because I think that these particular individuals may have been treated a little bit poorly throughout this process and just don't want to rely on somebody else to master their future anymore.
Yeah, the other interesting thing, that the report I talked about before, John, which I found fascinating, was that the average age of someone that creates a business in Australia is 45.
Yeah. That's
the average age. So I think when people think about entrepreneurship and they think about people creating businesses, you see these young, funky bearded people, a bit like yourself. But they're actually, sorry, I couldn't help myself there. But it's not always the truth. It's actually 45. And then there's another leap again at 55. And so they're the 2 age groups that actually where people create businesses and on average. And so it's quite fascinating that we found that during the look.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating too. I mean, when I do workshops or I talk to people about why you want to start a business, one of the words that actually comes up, and that they always hesitate to share it, but one of the reasons they start their own business is for control. And they get to this point where they're sick of being reliant on their boss, paying their wage or whatever it is, and they just want to be in control of whatever it is they're creating or however it's being managed as well.
Yeah, or they've taken redundancy potentially, or unfortunately been let go at that time. But they've actually said, I may have paid my mortgage off now. The kids are getting a bit older. It's time to actually go out and have a look at creating something. But I think going back to your original point, I thought I was quite excited to see that coming through. So if you haven't looked at Google Trends, well worth having a look. There's a lot of interesting data there.
There's some amazing transformation happening out there, isn't there? Some of these people that have been forced into this dire situation with their doors being closed and so forth. There's really a few different camps of different types of businesses, isn't there, that we're sort of seeing in this time. And we were having a bit of a chat about it the other day in our prep, Trent. How would you talk about the different camps, I suppose, of businesses that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, so I think loosely, if you look at it at a very sort of aggregated, anonymous level, and we've got well over 800,000 subscribers on our platform just in Australia, and so we can have a look at the data at a very aggregated level, and it's very anonymous, so we're not looking at people's individual files, of course, but at a very high level. So we are seeing businesses out there that are thriving, and they're ones in certain industries. So predominantly the ones that are e-commerce based. I've got teenage daughters, and the doorbell seems to ring every day, and a package arrives of some description, and then half of it seems to go back the other way. So I think Australia Post might be doing quite well.
Absolutely.
During this time, but we're definitely things that are e-commerce, transport and logistics have actually morphed quite well. And then of course there's other industries that have been hit really hard. So they're your sort of surviving ones. You've got some that have just gone into hibernation because it was just, it was easier just to shut the doors. And we're seeing some of those come back up now with the likes of with JobKeeper and so on coming through. You've got some that are surviving, so just morphing their traditional businesses into doing what they can at the moment. I had a great one the other day called Little Party People. And Little Party People in Melbourne run kids' parties. And so, at the moment, they clearly can't go to people's houses and they can't do their normal job. And traditionally their business is very much based in around the area or the local suburbs to where they're based. They try and service all of Melbourne, but it's predominantly around the areas that they service. And they're now actually running virtual online kids parties, and they're getting interest from all over the country. And
That's fantastic.
And so they've more, so if anything, they've actually created a new business model. And so
they've broken down the barriers, haven't they? They've broken down the borders, and they now have a much more scalable business than they did before.
Yeah, but traditionally you wouldn't have thought of running, if you're going to run a party for your kids, you wouldn't run a virtual kids party probably. I mean, you might in a gaming context, but so if you're a gamer, you might do that. But traditionally, if you're having an entertainer come to your house to entertain your children, you probably wouldn't have thought of doing a virtual one. Whereas now, under the circumstances we find ourselves, they're doing it. So there are people that are, really much pivoting their businesses to survival mode. There are unfortunately some that unfortunately won't make it through. And, we are seeing that, and that's really, really unfortunate. But, one of the things that really sort of shone through to me, some of the insights and research that we do on some of this aggregated data is that on average, about 50% of all small businesses on our platform are not cash flow positive at any point in time. So they're running month to month, week to week, and they haven't had cash reserves. And, when the pressures come on, it's made it really hard for them. And so that's horrible to see, but there is a reality that there's this, I think this kind of like, I'd almost call it a digitization crunch at the moment going on. And then there's businesses getting created, a bit like what Beck said before, and some of the ones I used before, there are businesses getting created off the back of this. And so I suspect it will create opportunity, and it is creating opportunity.
I'm really intrigued to see how many of these jobs that have been laid off actually come back. And unfortunately, my concern is that for every 10 that are cut, maybe 5 or 6 will be re-employed or cut or stood down. And that, of course, creates an opportunity because those people have to find something to do. But I am concerned about those businesses that are going through that and what that long-term impact has on other industries and so forth. Your fifth bucket, the dying businesses. Unfortunately, as you said, some of them just weren't funded well before they even went into this, so they had no room to move.
Yeah,
you concur with that, Rebecca?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're the clients or the businesses that we work with all the time to try and help improve their models. But sometimes it's just a bit of a struggle. Maybe the business is already coming to a natural halt. Maybe it was already its time to sort of start thinking about shutting down well before COVID, or it just... There was a lead up. We didn't just have COVID. I think is something that people forget. We've just been through bushfires. We've just been through floods. We've been through drought. We already had lots of businesses that were really suffering. And this was sort of the last thing they really needed at this point. And they just couldn't sustain it anymore. It's been too much.
In these businesses where we don't have the money to fund the JobKeeper payments, I feel terribly for them.
Yeah.
But they had no room to move within their business to start with, did they? You mentioned there before, Trent, the small business insights that Xero does, and Xero is in that fortunate position of getting live data on, almost a bit more than 800,000 subscribers. Is there any more early sort of insights that are being identified, or is it too early to tell?
It's a little bit early to tell. So we've been running Small Business Insights since 2017, and basically at a high level, some of the things that we track are how many businesses are cash flow positive. We look at payment times that are aggregated anonymous level. We look at employment data. So we normally look at employment growth, and it's probably a sign of the times in that since 2017, or at least since the GFC, everything's been steadily growing, and that's kind of the conditions that we're used to. And we look at some importing, exporting sort of data. But we also have the ability to look at data in other ways as well. So we are looking at how best to look at that data at the moment for a couple of things. One, to sort of understand what's happening. Things are a little bit hard to predict in some ways because we've got artificial stimulus going through. So you've got a shock of COVID coming through, which was a macro level event where we basically shut down and went into isolation. And then you've got the other scenario, of course, of government stimulus coming through now as well. So at a macro level, you've got to be a little bit careful because the data gets thrown out a bit, if that makes sense, because unnatural acts flowing through the data.
It'll be thrown out for a long time now in drawing comparisons, won't it?
It will when you look at comparisons. So data, I love data, as you probably understand from my Google Trends comments earlier, but you've got to be a little bit careful as well when you start looking at that. But we are looking at that with some using an external economist firm, Alpha Beta, who help us with that, and they're helping us at the moment to look through that. And we hope to be sharing some good insights soon, and not just on what's happened, but more importantly, can we see some trends about where things are going? You know, what industries are growing, as an example. What's actually happening out there? And as soon as we can, we'll be sharing that on our website. If you just search for Xero Small Business Insights, you'll see that information as it comes.
I love the small business insights because I love the simplicity of the data that you look at, but then obviously overlaying what does that mean? What are you going to do about it with the economist sort of comments and things? I think every small business should be reading that and taking lessons away to think about in their own business.
Well, that's really the intent about it, trying to work out how we can get it, right down to industry level and down to, location level as well. And so we can work out what's happening in regional Australia versus metro Australia. Because the other thing to remember as well is that we've been through, we've obviously been through bushfires and droughts and floods as well this year. So it's been, a horrific year. I mean, 2020 needs to be erased almost. When you look back over all those things that have happened, it's kind of all of those have had an impact or a shock to the economy in different regions, but obviously COVID's impacted everyone. And so we just got to work through how that looks. But there are some interesting insights coming through, and we will share those when we can.
And obviously there are those existing industries that were already, if you think about the Deloitte, the Deloitte sort of, what they call the disruption or the businesses that were going to evolve or be bombed and killed off. Retail's never been the same since GFC anyway. And, another hit, is retail ever going to survive? And what's really going to make any retail outlet unique?
Well, the big question there is, what is retail these days? That's actually the question. So retail, I don't think retail's gone away, but the way we interact with retail has. I gave the example before of my daughters. They like browsing and walking down the shop, but they'll buy almost everything online these days.
Yeah, it's an entertainment precinct.
Yep.
Rebecca, I think we've got a question.
We have quite a few questions coming through, which is fantastic. Yeah, we're leading straight on to the conversation we just had about real retailers and the changing environment. This is sort of along the same lines. And so are there any industries or business types you'd predict that would bounce back better than others? And I think that, that's going to actually tend to how well they carry through this environment as well.
Yeah, I think it's partly how they've carried through, but it'll also come down to where we unlock the economy as well. So when we start to unlock businesses so they can actually go back to operating as normal, I'm actually really pretty positive. I think once things start to unlock and we get back to some level of normality, I think there'll be a bit of an influx. It'll depend on what we can do around social distancing and all those sort of things. They'll have to pay themselves out, of course. But I know personally, I was looking the other day, we're not spending much money at the moment because we're all locked in our homes. There's a little bit of takeaway from time to time and the online shopping that my daughters are doing. But outside of that, as a family, we've probably saved more money than I could ever remember us saving. And I was talking to some friends about that and other colleagues, and they're finding the same. I think it's almost burning a hole in their pocket to a certain degree. So whilst there are some parts of the economy where people have really struggled and have been laid off, there are others that I think of actually the flip side. So I think hopefully once it opens back up, people will start spending quite quickly, and that will get us back on, get the economy back flowing again.
There is that entertainment factor with spending, isn't there? I know where our offices are here, there's a heap of sort of fancy boutiques around us. And I was talking to the parking attendant the other day, and he said there's ladies that are coming out of their houses just to walk around and look in the windows to just get out of the house.
Yeah.
And so there will be this, and I don't know about you, Rebecca, but going into this, I had many clients that were just hitting their straps, that were just having some great results in the lead up to this, which is why we need to have this conversation now about how do we keep that momentum going when we get to the other side of it.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the point before though. I think, to predict what industries are coming out, we'll definitely look at the data, but the data tends to tell you a little bit about what's happened necessarily. You've got to sort of look at that and sum up all the sort of other macro activities that are happening at the same time. But there are all these unnatural macro acts happening at the moment, which do make it a bit hard to predict. But I think once some of those release, the shock going in, hopefully as big as the shock coming out, if that kind of makes sense, that you actually hope that I think it's going to, my view is to be more of a V than a U as we come back to the other side.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that a lot of the businesses that have sort of come through this and made that pivot and made a change into different distribution channels or different services or different ways of delivery actually managed to keep that. So I'd like to see that, as the economy starts to open up a bit more and we get to put aside some of this social distancing and you get to walk into a shop again, or you get to go to a gym again, I'd like those businesses to still continue with what they did to get through this time and understand that those multiple business models are actually quite valuable to them. Have those different income streams and not just go back to business as usual. I think that, you know, as someone who's high tech and always looking towards the future, that's what excites me the most about it. It is, no, embrace this, keep going. Don't just do it as a band-aid for now. Keep investing in your systems and moving forward is one of my biggest pieces of advice for anybody.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It also brings in that human element, I think, Rebecca, into the conversation. And that I think there are some people that needed a bit of a breather. And I don't know whether, you know, when I first thought about working from home, I thought I might be able to duck downstairs with the kids every now and then and we'll go for a jump in the pool or something or other when it was a bit warmer. That hasn't happened. But for some people, it has given them the headspace to think about their vision, think about their strategy. Are they still on the right track? And that's where some amazing transformation is coming. I know Julia, good friend of Depot on the chat, made a comment on there that she's seeing in the regional areas in particular, that they are using this as an opportunity, a good excuse to sort of close up or a good excuse to sort of reinvent. And I find with the regional areas, they tend to be more innovative anyway because they are out of necessity required to come up with solutions to some of these roadblocks that we come up against in business.
And it's funny you say that, John. I was on a call week before last, I think, with a whole group of our accounting and bookkeeping partners, and one of them was from a regional area, and we were just talking about, you know, how you prepare for something whereby when you don't know how long it's going to last. And his response was, "We deal with droughts all the time."
Yeah.
He goes, "We do this," and he was very matter of fact about it. And I think it's almost a bit of a wake up, I think, for metro areas in some ways. To actually, they deal with this sort of scenarios different, but in terms of the unknown, they deal with this way more regularly.
All the time. I mean, they got you know, plagues of insects that come through. They got droughts. They got floods. They have all these different things. And growing up in a regional area, there is just a different layer of resilience that they have in the regions, and therefore have to be.
I felt that coming through from him straight away. It was so matter of fact.
So what about Xero, Trent? Because I mean, Xero has grown massively over the last. How long have you been as managing director now?
I've been at Xero for a little bit over 7 years.
So you've been at Xero a little over 7 years, and you've seen amazing growth within Xero internationally and within your own domain in Australia and Asia. How have you, or what has been the key to enable you to, I suppose, enable Xero to remain nimble and agile during these times and deal with the challenges that we've dealt with in the last little while? When, in theory, you're such a bigger ship now, it should be so much harder to turn than what it looks from the outside, that you have been able to adapt, even update your program really quickly and keep the team on track. Is there any key secrets or insights?
So I think there's a couple of things there. So when I joined Xero, it was about 30 or 40 people in Australia, give or take, somewhere around that. And, you know, we're now well over 700. So it has grown massively over the last 7 years. You know, we've got offices all over Australia. We've got offices up in Asia now that I look after as well. You know, I was a little bit fortunate in some ways that Asia had actually been going through this scenario since probably the third week of January. And so I'd actually seen a little bit of it playing out, and we'd already shut our offices in Asia already before we shut Australia. So I was a little bit prepared on that basis. But I think the big thing is, you know, the first thing was we definitely over communicated with our staff, and we spent, you know, quite a bit of time preparing and making sure that our staff were going to be able to work from home and be able to still be productive. I think was really important. You know, we're very lucky in the sense that we have the technology and the culture whereby you are allowed to work from home. And if your role so it suits itself to be able to work from home, then you're able to do that. But it's very different telling people they have to work from home. It's very different than someone having, because I think, you know, working from home historically has been a thing about flexibility, and it's been designed to really sort of help your work-life balance. Ironically, when you tell people they have to work from home, that work-life balance goes completely out the window, and all of a sudden you're now, you know, sharing your working environment with your partner if they work, or your children, or potentially even just by yourself, which is, you know, has its own challenges as well. So everyone's scenario is different. So the first thing was just to make sure that our people were as best prepared as they could be, and really over communicated to them, because they all deal with things like this in different ways. The next thing was making sure that our partners we're looking after our partners and customers as best we possibly could during that time. So we spun up some things like the Business Continuity Hub and tried to get as much information as we can in one central place where people could distill that easily, and started to run lots of webinars to update our partners and our customers. Because what we found is that there was just a massive amount of volume of information coming down, whether it be from government or other sources. And our partners being accountants and bookkeepers and small businesses were struggling to keep up with the volume of information coming through. Got to say a big, massive shout out to accountants and bookkeepers, by the way. They really were the meat in the sandwich in this scenario. They were sort of in between their clients and the government stimulus coming down. And they've done it pretty hard. To be honest, I've spoken to lots of them, and they've worked ridiculous hours, and the care they show for their clients is just unbelievable, in the broad. So big thank you to all the accountants and bookkeepers out there. But going back to the scenario at Xero, I think the thing that really helped us to be nimble was we've always been very big from a values perspective. And so people like to talk about culture, but we're a very values-led organisation, and values scale. This is something, if you're thinking about, depending on what size your business is, whether it's a couple of people, 5 people, 10 people, 100 people, 700 people, values are one of the few things that will scale on the way through, and staying true to your values as you go through, because rules really don't scale very well, and policies sometimes everyone goes in place, but they all get thrown out the window when you actually move everyone to working from home to a degree. And there's no playbook for this, so you have to sort of empower people to a certain degree, because there's no COVID playbook, and things have completely changed. And so we're very values led. You touched on some of the changes we had to make to our product. So, we work really closely with government. We're, one of the largest integrators to government, as a digital service provider, is the term that it's called. So we work really closely with them already. And, one of our big beliefs is how can we remove the friction that exists between small business accountants and bookkeepers and government agencies. So we've always been on that journey for a while. So we worked really closely with the ATO to get JobKeeper spun up as quickly as we can. And I think, if anything, JobKeeper galvanised our people. Yeah. It actually gave them something to get excited about. So the specifications for JobKeeper got delivered to us late on a Thursday afternoon, the day before Good Friday. So now that's basically where the specs came through. And I'll be honest, there was quite a lot of unknowns about them at that point in time. They were doing the best they could. Everyone was doing it on the fly. And our teams basically worked 24/7 to turn around somebody that would literally normally take months to do at the scale that we're at. Because one of the things you're doing is you're touching the payroll system. There's one thing you don't want to get wrong, is paying people. That's if you want really upset customers, pay them correctly. As you know, and so we've got to make sure that it's implemented, it's friendly as it can be, it's tested. And then you've got to do all the documentation about it. You've got to do all the education around it to actually make that happen. This is a lot of work that goes on, but if anything, it galvanized our people. They loved it. They were some of the online thing, we use Slack internally, and just the online banter going on, working all over that weekend period with our development team. They loved it. They thought they were doing something really purposeful.
And they'll forever have that bond of going through this together. It's those stages of team building. Was it forming, storming, norming, and performing? This is a bit of a storming phase to sort of get people through. And as you're growing so fast and adding new people all the time, I remember someone saying you need to create a crisis every now and then to actually get them through that storming phase and get them through the other side.
Well, you can. I mean, there's always the risk, isn't there, when you get a little bit complacent almost. And and we mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were talking, is that we've been in good times for a long time. Yeah. And nobody wishes this by any means. You don't want a crisis. When you say crisis, you don't want a crisis like this, when hopefully we never see one of these again. But it did actually bind them together, and they delivered it. And the feedback from our partners and our customers has been phenomenal. And even just the willingness of customers and partners to actually give us feedback as well about how things are going has really helped shape what we delivered.
I'd like to ask a follow-up, slightly off sort of question, but related. Did you ask your team to work Easter, or because of your values, they just did it anyway?
I actually don't know. That's a really good question. Look, it was probably assumed that they would, even though, but we wouldn't have had to ask.
Yeah. Interesting.
So it's a really good point. And also they're doing it remotely, you've got to remember as well. And so that makes it a bit hard. So I honestly can't recall, but I don't remember any. The reality is if one of them had said, I don't want to work over Easter, that would have been okay. We wouldn't have made them work. But I think everyone lent in. In fact, there's probably more people wanting to help than not.
We probably experienced the same thing, John, because by the time you were building out your software, we were reading stacks and stacks of legislation, answering questions and getting ready for our first set of webinars. Yeah, that's right. So, but we had the same thing, you know, I worked that weekend and you sure did, John, but there wasn't a forced expectation of the team to do it, but they just did it because a core culture piece for us is to make sure that we are educating ourselves and our clients and helping them through as much as possible. They knew that what that required was unfortunately working right through Easter. So it's what happened.
Yeah, and I think, you know, adversity creates clarity, doesn't it? I think lots of people have said that. And so you get really focused on the things that are really important and deliver what you have to do.
Absolutely.
I always talk about the squirrels in business that distract us from focusing on what we actually need to do. And this is
part of the book, mate.
But this is a time where you can't have squirrels. And so it's amazing how you cut things from your day because of the focus of what is absolutely critical. We got some questions on there, Rebecca?
We do have a few questions, and we've had a couple of questions come up in the Q&A in the chat, and they're all got a little bit of a similar theme around sort of advice to give businesses, both, you know, businesses coming into this and new people starting businesses. What are the key things that the basic skills that they sort of need to start to learn to build up their resilience for these sorts of events, which hopefully something like this never actually replicates this way again. But, you know, we talked about businesses being light on cash and not understanding their financials. So what do we really need to do, or what should they be doing to be more resilient?
That's a great question for you, John, that one.
Oh, thanks, Kate. Throw that one at me. Resilient. Well, I think it comes back to your values again, doesn't it? I mean, it all starts with your values and then being able to have those hard conversations. You know, I'm always harping on about the EQ versus IQ, and I know Xero's done a great job of that human sort of focus and integrating that into things. But if we're not having the EQ conversations before this COVID times, then how would you get through the time and then thrive on the other side? I think I heard someone say to me the other day, prior to COVID, EQ was a nice to have in corporates, but now it's a must-have, a bit like when websites went through that transition going back a few years. Would you agree with that from an EQ sort of?
I hate, I mean, people skills have often been regarded as soft skills. They use the term soft skills, and I really dislike the term soft skills because I think they're the harder skills. And you know, the three of us have come through accounting training, and I don't think we were ever taught anything around EQ, definitely not the generation that I went through. It was all very numbers based. And the reality is it's a service industry, and so you have to talk to people, and so they don't really teach you that. I don't think it's kind of hard to teach in some ways, but it is a skill that you can develop over time. And I think you know, I think it's not a soft skill. We recently added a whole lot of online learning programs. It's called Xero Central, was basically our hub where we keep all of our educational content. And we've actually added a whole lot of things in there around, you know, business continuity planning, you know, EQ type information things, well-being, all these things that traditionally people didn't really talk about. And we've partnered with Beyond Blue for the wellbeing program that we're doing, and that's really designed, you know, to help the industry. But there's all those things that people didn't historically ever talk about. And I think it's really important that we do talk about those, so you are a bit more prepared if something comes around. But I think also the reality is, you know, I think we've said this before, we've been in good times for a long time, and and there will be something come along at some stage that will adversely affect you. And so I think it's just having a look at the business and making sure that you do understand your cash position. I mean, I had a tradesperson come to my house this morning. We were talking about this just before we went on the call. And you know, what I loved about him today was, apart from doing a good job and fixing what he needed to fix, he actually asked for payment straight away. And so I actually, you know, put the phone in front of me, tapped it, which is actually great for him because his cash flow's up to date straight away. Great for me because I don't get an invoice in 4 weeks and then forget to pay it, and it sits in my inbox and it gets lost. But I think what I'm trying to say off the back of that is, if you're going to start a new business now, be digital from day one, and don't bring it on later. I think every business getting created going forward will be a digital business of some sort. I think the word digital sometimes gets a bit overused, misunderstood, but it's basically a lot of the digital stuff is actually business behaviors, and it's actually about the way that you run your business. And digital is sort of an overarching thing that sort of binds all that together, but it's bigger than that. So think about what you will do and what you won't do, and how digital technology can help you. Because I think it's technology is so readily available to everyone now. I mean, and at a really low cost point now.
Yeah.
It'll be really interesting how many new businesses also don't have office premises or anything going forward as well out of this. Which is that modern sort of business. We talked about modern leadership in your style, Trent, but if you link what you're sort of talking about there from a digital perspective back to what you've enabled from a human and EQ perspective, that is modern leadership in my mind, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. No, I agree. Yeah, definitely. It's how you combine those, but you still have to have the human angle to it. And so that's why I talked about our values earlier, but one of our values is #human. We actually use that in the office, and we want to make sure there's always the risk when you're developing software that you don't have the human angle element to it. And so it's really important that we do that.
But that comes down to the leadership as well, doesn't it? I mean, you've got to have the leadership to enable the human element to be focused, and it's not just a corporate sort of financial sort of a focus, or I don't know what you think about this, but I always talk about with the leadership, it all starts with self-awareness. And if you don't have the self-awareness of the leader, and you can't embed self-awareness in your team at the same time to be them aware of their own behaviours, then how are you possibly going to have emotional intelligence around the place?
Yeah, well, leaders cast a long shadow, and whether they realise that or not, they do. And the behaviours they exhibit are the behaviours that are embedded inside the business. And so you can have great purpose and great values, but it's ultimately the behaviours. The behaviours to me are the small moments of truth. And if you're ever going to see bad behaviours come through, it's when people are stressed, or that they're actually in an environment where they're feeling fearful. And I can only imagine right now there are people feeling like we have people inside our organisation that have actually, especially when we first went into lockdown, there's people that were uncertain. And I think what was great is our true values kind of shone through off the back of that, and the behaviour shone through. And if anything, we use an engagement tool now that we're kind of the scale that we're at, called Office Vibe, which gives us some real-time insights to how people are feeling, and they get a survey once a fortnight. It gets all collated, and it's all anonymous, but it gets aggregated together, and our engagement scores have all gone up. And I think part of that, I was thinking, if you had have asked me at the beginning of this, I would have thought they would have gone the other way. I would have thought they would have gone down, but they've actually gone up. And I think part of it is that the leaders of our business and our managers have actually made a much bigger effort to actually connect to our people than they probably would when they're in the office with them. So it's actually forced them to think deliberately about how often they're engaging, what they're engaging about, check in to make sure people are just okay. And it's, if anything, it's actually picked up. And so it's really pleasing to see the engagement's actually risen. So
our results show the same thing, Trent, much smaller scale. But yeah, and it was Office Vibes, the one you use, isn't it?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, and that's a great tip for any small business out there. We use one called Culture Amp as well, which does a similar sort of thing. Does a great job.
I think they're free under 20 users as well. So I mean, there's a free version under 20 users. So if you're not, it's a great tool to actually it never replaces asking people how they are. Yeah. So it doesn't replace that, but it gives you some indicators at a aggregated level about what's happening.
There's a great question on the Q&A from Glenn, which ties into this, and I think it's a really interesting question. At what point in Xero did you start cultivating the culture rather than just letting it evolve, like in a startup sort of situation? Was there a conscious sort of point, or was it?
I don't think we've ever cultivated it. I actually think I actually don't like the word culture.
Okay.
In the early days, I used to have a slide in my induction deck. We've got a bit bigger these days, so I don't have it anymore, but I'm happy to share it here. It used to say, we don't use the C word here, and the C word was culture. And the reason being is that if you have to talk about culture, it's normally gone, or you've got a problem with it. And so I worked for a large corporate before this, who was great, and they went through some challenges and have come out the other side and now have an amazing culture. But at that time, they'd lost their way to a degree, and they were running culture workshops where they were telling you what the culture was. And that worried me a little bit. To me, culture is an output of purpose, values, and behaviours. So it's all those things, and culture's built up over time from those little small incremental moments of truth that build up, and it does evolve. It's a living organism because it's an output. And I presented that at a recent roadshow that we did with Xero back in February when we were actually allowed to talk to people in real life. I showed that, and I tried to explain it to accountants that it's a bit like a P&L. If you just focus on the revenue or the loss, you actually miss all the components that made it up. And when you sit down with a client, you actually go through all the detail, the bits that made up the revenue or the loss. You don't just focus on the revenue or the loss. And culture to me is the same. Culture is an output of all these bits that you do that then give you either a positive or a negative culture. Because I get asked the question a lot, how do you have such an amazing culture? How do we build it like yours? And it's actually not quite that easy. You've got to set it up early with a great, really strong purpose, strong values, and then exhibit behaviors. But equally, when someone doesn't live up to those behaviors, the how is actually more important than the why or the what. How people go about it is the most important thing. And that's, if I was ever to do any sort of, disciplinary action to people, and that happens from time to time, it'd be far more likely to be about the how than the what of the how. Because I can help you improve the what and the how, but I can't help you with attitude.
Yeah. Very good. We got any more questions on there, Rebecca?
So we talked a little bit, well, Trent, you mentioned before the tradesperson who came to the house this morning who got you to pay straight away. So one of the questions on here is around what basic skills do you recommend people starting a business learn? So one of those things that I think whether you're starting a business or even running a business, generally people aren't very brave about tracing their money or getting paid, particularly in Australia. And as you're starting out, we can get a little bit too focused on just wanting to make sure everybody's happy. But I think that being brave and understanding your position on your revenue, when you need to get paid and how you're going to deal with people is phenomenally important. And particularly when we start talking about, managing your cash flow and ensuring that you have cash buffers moving forward. Is there anything else either of you would add to that as tips for, the basic skills you need to learn moving forward?
There's a few. I definitely think there's nothing wrong with asking to get paid. I think that's kind of like a basic expectation. If you're providing a service,
absolutely,
you'd definitely be asking to get paid. And it's interesting. We talk a lot about late payments to small business and the fact that businesses don't get paid on time. And there is some challenges there. There's no doubt. And it's something we've been campaigning for quite some time. But I do think there's a role that small businesses can play themselves in helping themselves get paid faster, because there are tools to help them do that. As an example, I used this morning. So I think that's definitely one. I think the other one as well is, regardless of how big you are, have a plan. I think I talk to so many people that actually don't have a plan, and I don't think it matters how big you are. To me, I think people overcomplicate business, and I think there's a lot of business books out there, and most great business insights can be written on a pamphlet. They actually don't need to be a book. I reckon I'd love to walk past one day hopefully we'll get back to the airport at some stage. I'd love to walk past and see a pamphlet handed out about how to run a business rather than a book, because I think it's not that hard. To me, it's about strategy, people, and execution. And generally, if something's going wrong, it's one of those three or multiples of those things. It's kind of like the three-legged stool, I call it. And regardless whether you're managing a business of one person or you're managing an ASX company of 700, you need to have a clear strategy or plan. And I think the word strategy doesn't get used enough in a small business, but it's basically a plan. And ultimately, what it is, it's about making choices about where you allocate your capital, whether that be human capital or money, and being really deliberate about where you're doing that. And then making sure if it's more than just yourself, have you got the right people that actually understand the plan and can execute against that plan? And then just continually monitor that loop as well, and make sure you're actually being really deliberate about what the outcomes from that should be, and so you can make corrections as you're going through. But I think it's relatively simple. I'm sure John could probably articulate it far better than I can.
Oh, look, I just revert to the simplicity of now, where, how. And there's different things you can do to understand where you are now. So you have to understand your numbers, but you have to understand your people as well. Where are your people at that point in time? Where are we going? How are we articulating where we're going? Do we actually have a clear picture? Have we painted the picture on where we're going and how are we going to get there? I actually like, someone once introduced me, Jacob, a good friend of Depot, introduced a fourth to that, and that was the why at the end, and just reinforcing to make sure you circle it all the way back Now where, how, and why are we doing this? I think that's a really good way to just simplify. And that's what most business plans are at the end of the day.
And I don't think it matters whether you're a big company or a small company or starting out. It's the fundamentals are the same.
Yeah. What were your three? Strategy, people, and execution as well? Yeah. And execution, implementation's where most people come down. There's some great business ideas out there. There's some great strategies. But getting people or systems and a group of people, more importantly, to implement it in that direction is where many, many businesses fail.
Execution is hard, and repeatable execution as well. That doing it as it scales is hard, but
and it's hard as it goes through the life cycle of business as well, because I'd love to see some of the Xero data around businesses by age and how old they are and where they get stuck. Because I talk to businesses, and your classic sort of startup, the entrepreneur sort of scraps in. The why is so clear in his head, but he's got to start to bring people on his journey. He gets to a point where he needs to start bringing other people on board, and so his energy levels actually drop off a bit because he's got to change his role and grow his role and do other things, and he's got to push through until he gets to the scale up sort of side of things.
It tends to be around. It tends to be around when you get to about 10 people and then 50 people again. It seems to change quite dramatically, because 10 people is kind of when you're thinking about bringing your first person in who might actually be a manager or someone who's coming in who's actually not, doing what the core thing is the business does anymore. They're actually doing an admin role or something else. And then at 50, you've got to start putting a few layers in, because you control, and you've got to start letting go a little bit as well. Yeah. And that's where it gets hard. And so consistently when we talk to startups, they're kind of the two areas we see. 10 people and 50 seem to be a very consistent type of a number.
Well, mate, I mean, you joined Xero when it was 30 people. What'd you say it was? 700 now?
Over 700.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a few more sort of waves or hurdles in that growth as well.
Yeah, and I've done a couple of presentations actually on sort of things I've learned through that as well. And probably not a good time for today, but I'll share at some stage.
Glenn's added another question on there, which I think is a good flow-on question to that. What makes repeatable execution so hard?
What makes repeatable execution so hard is that you typically outgrow your systems and tools and processes. And so as your business grows, you get to a point where your systems and tools and processes start to fight you rather than work for you. So you've got to keep evolving them as well, because you might probably never built them to be scalable in the first place. And, so you give a great example. So technology startups are the best at this. They actually build homegrown systems quite often because they're by nature. So it seems cheaper. So we'll just code our own and then they run into scale problems, which goes back to the old adage that says only build what you sell. Don't build anything you're not going to sell. It's just a bit of you build processes, but in terms of the technology aspect. But I think that's what happens is people outgrow their systems, tools, and processes, and even their culture to a degree. And so you got to let that you got to let those evolve and grow and invest in them.
And you need different people, you need different processes for different stages in the life cycle. Do you have any view on that, Rebecca? The repeatable execution?
I actually think part of the repeatable execution, what you've got to do before you execute again is probably re-strategize again. So you have to restart the whole cycle over and over again. The plan and the strategy at the beginning is not going to be the same in 2, 5, 10 years. And you need to remember to take that minute to sit back and rethink about, well, what's the strategy now? What has changed about the business? What has changed about the people who are in my business? What has changed about the environment in the business? What has changed about me and what I want out of this business? Like all these things, and start again. And I think that unless you have that plan, executing something without a plan is always going to be difficult. So that problem with re-execution is because you didn't replan.
Which comes all the way back to now, where, how, and why again, doesn't it? Just checking in on the 4 things. If something changes in the now, then we've got to reflect that within the how.
And that's to say, I was talking about strategy, people, execution. To me, that they spin around, by the way. So they're actually going from each other. And so when one of them's not working, it generally means that you need to revisit one or more of those 3 things.
Yeah, great stuff. As we start to sort of wrap up the convo, I'll get you both to start thinking about what are those tips you'd be giving a business owner out there at the moment to get ready for the other side of the COVID curve. Hopefully we're back into, like you say, a big V rather than a U. What advice would you give a business owner, a business manager, or a business leader out there? Who wants to kick us off?
Oh, I'm happy to go first. I mean, I think I touched on this before. I mean, there is no playbook for this, for what we're going through at the moment. And so I think in the absence of no playbook, you fall back on the basics. And so I think at the end of the day, the first thing is to look after yourself. Because if you don't look after yourself, you're actually no use to anyone else.
Yeah.
And we're all dealing with this in different ways. You know, some of us are homeschooling, some of us are living by ourselves, and we've all got some challenges, but you've got to look after yourself, because otherwise you're really of no use to anyone. So I think that's the first thing that I would say. And, you know, we will get through this. I mean, I think one thing I love is we are resilient. We will find our way through. Everyone's going through the circumstances in slightly different ways, but we will get through. Talking about homeschooling, my son just walked in the room next to me, but that's all right. I told him not to, but that's okay. That's fine. But that's the biggest one for me, is just make sure you look after yourselves.
That's the authenticity coming through, Trent. You know, I'm loving seeing in people's offices or houses and so forth, and just seeing the reality of what's behind the scenes. What about you, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think that it is an unknown scenario, and nobody really knows exactly where it's all going to come out, but I am feeling quite positive about it. But I'd like to say to anybody who's not sure what they're going to do next, if you think that you need some additional advice or you want some help, don't be embarrassed or shy or scared to ask for it. Reach out to other people in your community, reach out to your accountants, reach out to other business advisors. You know, just reach out and find some help and get the answers that you need. And whether that's for your business or whether it's for you and some personal issues, absolutely. Don't be shy. Just we all here, and I think it's the most important thing is we all come out of it together.
Well, that's the authenticity again, isn't it? Being able to put your hand up and say, I actually need some help. And I'd hone in on the leadership side of things as well. I think, you know, now is the time for the leaders to shine in the business. Now is the time for your team to need you more than anything else, to guide them, to give them an opportunity to have someone to talk to within their businesses, but also to make sure you're aware of yourself. And so that self-awareness sort of thing comes back in from that emotional intelligence. And I know over the last 6 weeks, I know Rebecca has heard me have a big whinge at times where I've felt like I haven't been able to control things, or I haven't been able to achieve what I needed to achieve at that point in time. But if you don't have those people to talk to, if you don't have the awareness that you need to talk to somebody about it, then how on earth are you going to lead your team through this? So now is a great opportunity for those leaders out there. Trent, thank you very, very much for joining us today. We absolutely appreciate it.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, you've got some great insights. And as I said at the beginning, I really do consider you one of the modern leaders out there for business. And I love your style. I love the way you go about things. And I think what you do in a big company is just as transferable down at the SME sort of level as well. So thank you for sharing your insights today. And I look forward to the next Small Business Insights as well, and seeing what extra data comes out of there.
We'll share it as soon as we can. I think, you know, there's a big responsibility on all the tech companies who have much better real-time data to be sharing that, and hopefully they can help inform our way out of this. And
tell your son he can go on Fortnite now if he wants to.
Unlikely.
Thanks, Trent. And thank you, Rebecca, again. Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.